Greetings from Dallas, Texas. September 27th was the birth anniversary of Shaheed Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh, of course, is the well-known Indian revolutionary and freedom fighter. And virtually every schoolboy and schoolgirl in India is familiar with his life as it's taught in Indian schools and colleges. There are memorials to Bhagat Singh in Punjab. The government of India has issued a postage stamp in his honor. Bollywood, of course, has made multiple movies on his life and his exploits as a freedom fighter. There are plays about him. There's an airport in Punjab that's named after him. So he's a well-known figure. The treatment of Bhagat Singh, however, in the popular imagination has always been that of a violent revolutionary. There has never been anything more in terms of his portrayal other than this cardboard cutout depiction of him as some sort of firebrand, and the activities that he did were all violent. He never believed in any sort of intellectual thought or any kind of negotiation with the colonizers of the time. So all of this has contributed to what I feel is a fairly distorted picture of the man. So what was Bhagat Singh actually like? What were his ideas? And what were some of the things that he wanted to convey to the people before he actually became known as this quote-unquote violent firebrand whom we all know about today? As background, a little information about Bhagat Singh's early days. He was born in a village called Banga, which is near Layalpur, now called Faisalabad in present-day Pakistan. His father and uncle were both involved in revolutionary activities, and they were members of this Ghadar party starting in 1915. And it's no surprise that he developed these revolutionary ideas himself, as the environment that he grew up in was fairly full of them, and his relatives were involved in those activities as well. Now, education-wise, he went to a national college in Lahore, which was founded by Lala Lajpat Rai, who himself was a fairly well-known Indian nationalist and a leader at the forefront of the agitation for India's independence from the British. Lajpat Rai was leading a protest in October of 1928 against the Simon Commission, which was a commission appointed by the British government to investigate some political reforms or the possibility of political reforms in India. The Indians weren't too happy with the composition of the Simon Commission, as it contained or was comprised of only English people, and there were no Indians on that commission. So there were widespread protests against the commission in parts of India, and Lajpat Rai happened to be leading a protest in Punjab. The police didn't look too kindly on this protest, and one of the senior officers of the Punjab police, a chap by the name of Scott, the superintendent of police, decided to order a lathi charge, a cane charge against the protesters. And Lajpat Rai was seriously injured as part of that protest during that cane charge. He actually died as a result of his injuries and a heart attack, which I believe took the cause of his, was determined to be the final cause of his death. But people believe that the death was in fact brought on by the injuries that he sustained during that protest. Now, Bhagat Singh felt a proximity to Lajpat Rai. He attended a college which was started by Lajpat Rai. And in a wave of anger that swept across the land at the time, Bhagat Singh decided that he had to avenge Lala Lajpat Rai's death at the hands of the British police. Bhagat Singh was a member of an organization called the Hindustan Socialist Republic Association. In December of 1928, Bhagat Singh and an associate of his by the name of Rajguru decided to carry out a plan to assassinate Scott, the man who had ordered the lathi charge against the protesters and who was ultimately responsible for Lajpat Rai's death. So Bhagat Singh and Rajguru lay in wait for Scott to emerge from the police headquarters in Lahore. And the plan was to basically assassinate the man at that time. Unfortunately for Bhagat Singh and his associate, the person that they wound up killing in a case of mistaken identity was a junior officer called Saunders. So Saunders exited the building and got onto his motorcycle to leave the area. And Bhagat Singh and Rajguru basically attacked him. Rajguru was the man who fired the first shot, and he felled Saunders. When Saunders lay on the ground after being shot, Bhagat Singh walked up to him and fired 8 more shots in quick succession, finishing him off. They then made their escape following the incident, and then they were on the run for quite some time after the incident, even as the police and authorities mounted a search for them. But they managed to make their escape, and they were not found for some time after that incident. Following a period in hiding, in April of 1929, Bhagat Singh and another accomplice of his decided that they would carry out another act of violence against the British government. So they decided to mount a spectacular attack against the Central Assembly in Delhi. So Bhagat Singh and his accomplice were in the visitors' gallery, and they tossed a couple of bombs into the assembly building, into the assembly hall. And this caused a great deal of confusion and smoke and panic in the building. And Bhagat Singh and his accomplice could have escaped if they wanted to. But his intent was to actually be arrested at the site. He knew that if he was arrested, he would be put on trial. And his intent was then to use the trial as a means of expressing his views publicly against the British colonizers and galvanizing a wave of protest against British rule in India. So he hoped that his violent actions would eventually lead to some productive results on the part of the British government in terms of perhaps granting additional autonomy to India or as a preliminary step to freedom, or maybe even total freedom itself. Unfortunately for Bhagat Singh, his plan did not work out because the British decided to make the trial one that was held in camera instead of being a public trial. So a population that was anxious for change in the tactics being employed to oust the British from India were fascinated by the spectacle of this young man and his accomplices, his co-conspirators and the co-accused, standing trial in a jail in a court in Lahore, and then being imprisoned in the jail in Lahore, and then going on a hunger strike in protest against the conditions that they were held in. His popularity increased, and his name and the descriptions of his exploits spread like wildfire across India. This was quite a change for a population which had really been fed this mantra of non-violence by the likes of Gandhi and his cohorts like Nehru Patel, and the others. So there was a sea change in the attitude of Indians who were struggling against British rule at the time. Bhagat Singh, despite the fact that he was in jail, was able to continue reading. He was a voracious reader. And now I want to talk a little bit about how his ideas were shaped by his reading. He read a lot of Marx and Lenin. He read a lot about internationalism. He read a lot about politics. And prior to his arrest, he had been a prolific writer and contributor to many, many journals, which were nationalist in nature and which essentially were looking to promote the ideas that Bhagat Singh so believed in. So what, in fact, were these ideas that Bhagat Singh so firmly believed in? Bhagat Singh was a firm believer in socialism. His reading of Lenin, Marx, and other socialists influenced his thinking greatly. He was quite convinced that whether the British ruled India or a coterie of the elite ruled India, the condition of the lower classes would not change unless there was a real change in the social structure of the country. So he was convinced that socialism was the key to bringing about the changes that he wanted to see in India. His other core belief was what I would call secular atheism. Following Gandhi's shutdown of the non-cooperation movement in 1922, there were incidents of communal violence between different communities in India. And this also had a deep impact on his thinking, where he was convinced that if political parties promoted one side or the other in a religious conflict, that this was basically a recipe for disaster. He was of the opinion that politics, governance, and religion should be kept completely separate from each other. And he wrote frequently about this in many journals of the time. The other idea that he tried to promote was this idea of what I would call universalism. And this idea of this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is so popular in India, and it is being pushed by Modi. In fact, it was one of the key concepts that was advanced as part of the G20 summit that was held recently in New Delhi. So Bhagat Singh was very much a votary of this concept, and he in fact wrote extensively about it. He even wrote an article in this magazine called Matwala, and he called the article Vishwa Prem. He wrote this in 1924. Now, ironically, despite the fact that his views were not looked upon too kindly by the English, because they felt that he was promoting secessionism, violent overthrow of the government, he was basically writing about ideas which would be considered sedition at the time, the Communist Party of Britain actually came forward and spoke up in his support. So his trial basically ended in 1931, and he was sentenced to be hanged. And it's interesting that Gandhi was one of the people who appealed to then Viceroy, Lord Irwin, for clemency. The problem was that Bhagat Singh was very clear that his philosophy was essentially what can be described as Marxist militant atheism, with the emphasis being on militant. Despite the fact that he was an intellectual, he was a voracious reader, he had contributed widely to intellectual thought in India, and that he was well known among intellectual circles in Punjab and beyond. The unfortunate reality that he was involved in violent acts basically made him a target in the eyes of the British. Now, there are some amazing what-ifs in history that one must consider. So if Bhagat Singh had not been hanged in March of 1931, if he had lived into his 50s or his 60s or his 70s, as did other leaders of the time. His philosophy of atheism, which he described in detail in articles that he wrote. He even wrote an article while he was in jail saying, titled "Why I'm an Atheist." So he described that in detail. What if Bhagat Singh had survived until the era after the partition of India? Maybe, perhaps he could have talked to his people and he could have asked them why people were so intent on slaughtering each other in the name of religion. If he had survived beyond 1947, perhaps he could have talked to some of the zamindars of West Punjab at the time and appealed to their better angels to see if they would actually think of treating the laborers who were under their control slightly better than cattle. Perhaps he could have played a role in bringing about some sort of rapprochement between the newly created countries of India and Pakistan following the bloody carnage and the violent partition of 1947. We will never know what the possibilities could have been had Bhagat Singh actually survived to see the events of partition and actually act to possibly play a role in bettering the circumstances at the time. I personally feel that Indian schools, colleges, and historians should make a better effort to promote Bhagat Singh as an intellectual and a thinker, and to talk more about his ideas rather than just the fact that he was a violent revolutionary of the time and that he eventually was sent to the gallows for his actions. As he said, you can kill people, but you can't kill their ideas. So as we commemorate Bhagat Singh, I would like to end with a famous couplet that is associated with his life. It was actually written by a guy called Bismil Azimabadi, a poet from Bihar. And it was dedicated to the revolutionaries and the freedom fighters of India of the time. It still is very, very popular in India, and I think it will continue to be a popular couplet for people who are involved in the same kind of struggle that Bhagat Singh was involved in. सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए कातिल में है. Thank you for watching. Take care. Jai Bharat and God bless America. Thank you.